Wisconsin has extended Luke Fickell's contract by one season through the 2031 season. Will the head man in Madison still be around and roaming the sidelines in 2026 or 2027? The state of Badger football is in a little bit of flux.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
It is worth noting that this Luke Fickell one-year extension by Chris McIntosh and Wisconsin was a part of a series of extensions to a quad of coaches. I think a couple of soccer coaches, volleyball coach Kelly Sheffield, and of course Luke Fickell himself. And this is kind of standard operating procedure for UW-Madison as well. Former head coach Paul Chryst got a similar type of extension following the 2021 season. 5 games into 2022, and he was out the door, and Chris McIntosh fired him at that point in time. So it's worth noting. I know there's been a very interesting reaction on social media as it pertains to this, and as it pertains to maybe the success of Wisconsin football and how that ties into a contract extension, certainly under Luke Fickell. But it kind of gives me an excuse to talk about, I think, one of the more interesting topics within the Big Ten here in this 2025 offseason. And as we get closer and closer and closer to the 2025 football season, that this is a prove-it type of year. This is a season a little bit on a teeter-totter. Which way is it going to fall? Is it going to fall this way and really continue to go down? Or is it going to start to take a little bit of an upward trajectory, maybe with a new offensive philosophy? The offensive philosophy that probably always should have been the offensive philosophy in Madison, Wisconsin. We'll talk more about that here as this program certainly continues. Now, I've got a series of points when I talk about Luke Fickell and I talk about the current state. I said the state was in flux. The state is in question for Wisconsin. And 2025 will do more and say more about the state of Badger football than maybe any season in recent history for those folks and those fans in Madison, Wisconsin. I've said this times before, but I feel like Wisconsin football under Luke Fickell, they are running on the ultimate hamster wheel right now. The wheels on the Badgers go round and round. This is a program that has not been able to gain traction in the 2 years that Luke Fickell has been the head coach. And they had traction year after year after year since Barry Alvarez stepped foot onto this campus in the early 90s. Just very consistent success, and you always knew what you were going to get when Wisconsin took the field. I think Wisconsin under Luke Fickell has not been able to gain traction because of them ditching their identity of what made Wisconsin football great for so many years and so many decades. I think that there's a new coach that wants to come in and maybe sees the changing landscape of college football, and he's trying to keep up with it. And maybe a reason why Paul Chryst was fired, and there were reasons, lagging back in recruiting, and there were, certainly some other reasons, the trajectory of where this program was certainly going. But I think this new coaching staff says, hey, we got to get with the times a little bit here at Wisconsin, when I'm not totally sure that's exactly what was needed. So their inability to gain traction is them tossing aside what made Wisconsin great and what allowed Wisconsin to really rise through the ranks year after year and decade after decade. This is not a slight against Luke Fickell. I think, a couple of years ago when this hiring process was taking place, you look around and you see a guy and the success that Luke Fickell had at Cincinnati and him being in the Big Ten and Luke Fickell's mindset and really his culture and really his philosophy. If he's out there at a program like Wisconsin, that makes a lot of sense. He was one of the hottest names in college football at that point in time. But to me, and I have a small, let's call it a distant personal connection to former Wisconsin defensive coordinator Jim Leonhard. But it seems like when Jim Leonhard left, got passed up, however you want to certainly structure that, it seems like the soul of Wisconsin football also up and left. The toughness that you had when you played against the team with the W on the side of your helmet, that same toughness, we'll talk about identity as this show progresses, that same identity, it seemed, left when old Jimmy left Madison just a couple of years back as well. And Wisconsin is trying to get back now that identity after the failed experiment that was Phil Longo on the offensive side of the football as well. Fickell is sitting below 500 through 2 years. The bowl streak is over. The axe is in Minnesota, and now Wisconsin is set to have the toughest schedule in college football. It's difficult. Not saying it's impossible, because I think there are certainly some positive things about Wisconsin football as we head towards 2025. But it is difficult to sell the vision, I think. And, what's happened also this offseason with the Xavier Lucas stuff and a lot of transfer portal departures and just everything that's kind of gone with it. It's really hard to sell the vision, I think, and sell the optimism right now at Wisconsin, certainly for the future, as those wheels continue to keep going around and around and around. Now, who is Wisconsin in the new college football era? When we went to an 18-team Big Ten, when we got rid of the Big Ten East, and we got rid of the Big Ten West, there was a popular talking point, and I kind of talked about it certainly as well, and it made a lot of sense that those teams that were playing in the Big Ten West, that really since COVID, that was a division that certainly went on a little bit of a slide and wasn't as maybe high quality football as, of course, there was up over in the Big Ten East with Ohio State, with Michigan, and with Penn State. Some of those teams in the Big Ten West needed to be able to adjust for what was coming, whether it was playing more difficult teams in the traditional Big Ten footprint, like the ones out east that I just mentioned more often, or whether it was facing some of these West Coast teams that like to throw the football. They're a little bit faster, certainly on the perimeter. Whatever that was, I feel like the Iowas of the world, the Wisconsins of the world, and some of those Big Ten West programs of the world needed to be able to adjust at that point in time. And as I've said previously, I felt that they overcompensated with the hiring of Phil Longo. One thing that I've really seen with that experiment over the last 2 years, and I think it's rung true, is at some programs, in some areas of the country, you can recruit a certain athlete, you can recruit a certain player to a certain program. Sometimes it doesn't matter who the head coach is. It doesn't matter who's on the coaching staff. It doesn't matter who the coordinators are. Like Rich Rodriguez, when he got hired at Michigan, was one of the best, most creative minds in college football at that point in time. You bring that type of spread offense to Michigan, and it didn't work because that's not what Michigan is built on. Michigan, to a similar way like Wisconsin, is built on a lot of run game. It's built on a lot of toughness. It's built on more traditional football because up in the north, that's what you can recruit to. That's what really works well for you, and it really takes it to 11 with Wisconsin, as it certainly is compared to someone like Michigan that can recruit now at more of a national level. Like, it's been really difficult to I don't think you can recruit high-level quarterbacks and the high-level wide receivers that you need to be able to make a Phil Longo, air raid, dairy raid, whatever you want to call it, offense work. Now, and it's crazy when you look at some of these recruiting classes, top 25, really good type of classes that Luke Fickell is bringing in. Look at some of the top players that Wisconsin is bringing in year after year after year within the Luke Fickell regime. 4-star offensive linemen, 4-star running backs, one of which played a lot as a true freshman in Darian Dupree, certainly, by the way, and defense. You're recruiting the Wisconsin type of recruiting class at the top of these classes. even when you were investing and had a Derry Ray type of offense. So you were recruiting a Wisconsin style when you were running maybe a non-Wisconsin style, certainly on the offensive side of the football. And with a much more, we're going to talk about the schedule here in just a minute, but in this new era, where in a previous era of the Big Ten West, Wisconsin expected 8 wins a year. They expected 9 wins a year. They expected 10 wins a year. That's what you expected from Badger football year in and year out. Now, considering the state of this program, considering how deep and considering how good this conference is as the best football conference in college football, the Badgers might need to look in the mirror. And it's not just Wisconsin. It's certainly other programs as well. But we're talking about Wisconsin right now specifically. I think this is a program that needs to look in the mirror and figure out, what do we really expect out of our football program? Right now, in the program's current state and in the Big Ten's current state, you can't look in the mirror and say, yeah, we expect to win 8, 9, and 10 games a year like we did prior. I think there's a little bit of adjusted expectations that needs to go on at a program like the Wisconsin Badgers right now. And that's difficult. Look, I understand for some of these fan bases, for the Iowas and the Wisconsins of the world, to be able to look around and says, hey, maybe some years we need to be okay with 7-5. Maybe even some years we need to be okay with 6-6, because in the Power 2, and especially the Big Ten, these schedules are going to be very difficult year in and year out. And Wisconsin right now isn't a program that's maybe lush with cash like the way some other programs are in the Big Ten. And we know that is such a huge factor of building rosters and creating successful football teams in 2025 and beyond. All right, so now the big question. There's a lot of people out there that are saying Luke Fickell is on the hottest of hot seats in the Big Ten. And I do believe that his seat is ultra warm in Madison, Wisconsin. This schedule is tougher. I don't know how much better that this team is than that 2024 squad. I think there's bits and pieces where this team is better, but I think there's also bits and pieces where they're suffering pretty significant losses, whether it's players that ran out of eligibility or whether it's some of these players that entered the transfer portal as well. Now, as you look at Luke Fickell's future in Madison, I think that Wisconsin is going to approach this season a lot like maybe Florida did with Billy Napier. They had an insane schedule. The Gators did last season. And what did Florida go? Did they go 6-6, 7-5, something like that? I'm not exactly sure what they went, but they went something to that effect record-wise. And Billy Napier is still running it back as head coach of the Gators because, and this is a big thing right now, he showed he showed a plan. He showed improvement. He showed progress that young players, and he showed an identity of what they're going to be in the future. And for Wisconsin, it all comes down to two similar things like Florida, the two I's: identity and improvement. I think Chris McIntosh and this athletic administration has to look like, what is Wisconsin football? I mentioned that the soul of Badger football left when Jim Leonhard left this program. They need to find that soul. I think they're going to find a similar soul with Jeff Grimes trying to run a physical, nasty type of run the football type of offense in Madison, Wisconsin. They need to find that identity this season, and they need to continue to show improvement week after week after week. There have been weeks and there have been stretches within Badger football where it starts to look really good, and then maybe it drops a little bit. Consistency. Wisconsin had been one of the most consistent programs year after year after year after year. And consistency hasn't exactly been their best trait during the Luke Fickell regime, certainly, as well. Now, I've talked about the schedule. I want to finish up this show. I want to talk very quickly about this schedule because there's a couple of points that I really want to make as it maybe pertains to what Luke Fickell's status is going to be for 2026 and beyond. Okay, so I know we've got the spring transfer portal window. I know that these rosters are certainly not finalized, but I think right now we got a good idea, a 75, 80% idea of what these teams and what these rosters are going to look like next season. So I'm just going to go through this schedule week by week, and I'm going to show you just how difficult it is going to be for Luke Fickell to maybe even get to bowl eligibility next season. Okay, so you start the season at home against Miami of Ohio and Middle Tennessee. In theory, those are two opportunities to gain a lot of confidence, to put a lot of points on the board, and really get off the season with a strong start. That, I think, was the intention this past season in 2024 when they had Western Michigan and South Dakota. But those games against the Broncos and the Coyotes, I think maybe showed what was to come for Wisconsin. They showed chinks in the armor against both of those football teams, and it was more difficult than it certainly should have been against a MAC team and against an FCS team. Hopefully Wisconsin can get out to a good start, but obviously I foresee them winning both of those football games. Going to Alabama. Yeah, I'm not sure if I see that as a victory. And I know Alabama may not be what it was under Nick Saban, but I certainly think Kalen DeBoer is a good head coach. Yeah, that's going to be. I don't think they're going to win that game. So 2-1. I don't think Maryland will be ultra great this year. You get them at home early in the season. I think you can beat the Maryland Terrapins. I think Wisconsin is a better team than Maryland certainly right now. Okay, you're feeling pretty good. You're sitting there at 3-1. I thought last year Michigan, well, they had a better record, first of all, but I thought Michigan, even for as low as they were as a program, Michigan was a better football team than Wisconsin. I think Michigan has improved more this offseason than the Wisconsin Badgers certainly have. This game is in the Big House. We'll throw that one to the Michigan Wolverines. So what are you sitting? You're sitting at 3-2 right now. Iowa is a gigantic swing game. Iowa next season for Wisconsin could be a huge swing game to determine if the Badgers go to a bowl game, and you'll see that as the schedule, as I illustrated, continuing to go on. I'm going to throw the Badgers a bone. I'm going to throw the Badgers a W. I'm going to throw the Badgers a Heartland Trophy victory right now, and it'll help me maybe prove a point as this thing certainly progresses. Do I think Wisconsin is a better roster and is a better football team than Iowa right now? I'm not so sure. But for now, we're going to throw them a win. Hey, rivalry win. We're feeling good at 4-2. Okay, you beat Iowa. You took home a trophy. Now you get Ohio State and Oregon in back-to-back weeks. So now you're sitting at 4-4 going into the final month of the season, and that's with a win over the Iowa Hawkeyes. You look at these next couple of games against Washington and Indiana. Right now, I'll throw a split at them. I'll throw a win against one of them, and I'll throw a loss against the other. I think both of these teams, Washington and Indiana, could give the Badgers fits with what they have at the quarterback position, the type of plays and the type of skill players that they have on the perimeter, certainly on the outside as well. But I'll say, let's just, for argument's sake, we'll say a win over Washington and then a loss on the road against Indiana. It could certainly go the other way around, but I think Indiana is a better football team than the Washington Huskies. With that schedule, a win over Washington, which, could be a little bit difficult, and a win over Iowa, even at that time, you'd be sitting there at 5-5, and you have one of the most experienced and probably a top 15 type of roster in college football in the Illinois Fighting Illini, and then you take a team at Minnesota, a team that was better than you last season, a team that I think has a good amount coming back to their team. That could be, if you lose both of those games, a 5-7 regular season with a win over Washington and a win over the Iowa Hawkeyes. When I look at this schedule for the Wisconsin Badgers, I probably see 3 games, maybe a fourth, but 3 games where I feel pretty comfortably about a victory. Miami, Ohio, Middle Tennessee, and Maryland. And then there's some games in there like a Washington game, like an Iowa game, like a Minnesota game that are toss-ups. Wisconsin has to win the toss-ups. I think with this schedule, it is going to be one of the toughest schedules in college football. Michigan, Iowa, Ohio State, Oregon, Washington, Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota is a crazy, difficult stretch. I'm not here to, be Debbie Downer, so to speak, on Wisconsin football, but I think these are things that need to be talked about and where Wisconsin fits with Luke Fickell at the helm in the grand scheme of things in the Big Ten Conference. Those are my thoughts. If you're a Wisconsin fan that's ultra optimistic right now, tell me I'm wrong, but also tell me why I'm wrong and kind of what's your thoughts of Luke Fickell leading this program right now. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.